All right. You're there. Hello. I will see if I can do this now. Make host. Okay. All right. So I think I should be able to leave. I left the new form of training so that I could do this. So I need to jump back in there. But if I leave, you should be all set.
Okay.
I think. It should show up that you're the host now?
It does.
Okay. If there's any issue, just let me know and I can hop back on.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
So I'm going to hit record. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can everyone see can everyone see the cover slide? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping items. As you heard me say, this meeting is being recorded. So anyone that not able to watch, or if you'd like to watch this again, to anyone, posted on the county's website. It'll take a couple days to make the recording available. So give us through the end of this week. All the participants will remain muted. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to submit it through the Q&A link or the chat box, and our team is monitoring that and will answer the questions during the applicable section of the presentation. And quick agenda items. Ann Vara will kick us off from the county to just give an overall update and welcome everyone. And then Jim Winnica is going to introduce the entire collaborative team. And then we will walk through the details of the post-construction stormwater updates, the objectives of the program, why there are changes being made, and then walk through all the details of the actual proposed updates, the detailed equations, and then walk through a couple of site plan examples of looking at the impacts or the changes with the existing standards and then the proposed new standards, and then the ever exciting topic of O&M. And then we'll wrap up with where we're going next after today, and then have an open dialogue and questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann, and I'm going to stop sharing because I believe she has something to share. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Appreciate everyone being on this call. I understand that we had about 150 people sign up, so that's a lot of devotion to stormwater. So thank you so much, and thank you OHM for helping us guide through this this process and this new age process. And I really want to again thank everybody. I know this has been going on for a long time. We've had a tremendous amount of cooperation, and that's really critical to get this moving in the right direction. I also want to share with you, as you know, Oakland County Water Resource Commissioner's Office is deeply committed to this process and also this process of innovative stormwater techniques and green infrastructure. And I'm very happy to announce that the Oakland County Executive's Office is also committing to sustainability and moving forward with a climate plan, not only for our campuses, but also for all of Oakland County. And then we're prepared to plan with the region as well. They are so committed that they brought on, Steve Korth has been part of the process along with Commissioner Nash and Jim Winnica. But they brought on a consulting firm to look at these two things, the climate action plan and also sustainable practices for the county and county campus. And they've also just recently put out a job announcement for a sustainability officer, which reports directly to the county executive's office. So that's good news for Oakland County and Oakland County residents. Long time coming, and we're very happy to be a part of that. So with that, thank you again, and I'm going to turn it to Jim Winnica.
Thanks, Ann. Appreciate that. Certainly some really exciting things going on at the county level in terms of sustainability, which really dovetails closely, obviously, with what we're talking about here today, the stormwater standards. So as many of you know, over 2 years ago, we started this exciting endeavor for new stormwater standards to address some new regulations. So this was, like I said, at least 2 years ago. Early on, we had the goal of, we heard a lot from developers throughout the region that, hey, why are the standards different in Oakland from Wayne and Macomb and Livingston? What can't they be similar? So we heard a lot of that early on, and so we had that goal right from the get-go that we were really going to try to address this to the extent possible and try to get some consistency amongst the counties. So that was our goal. What we did is we formed a committee with the various counties, and I'm going to briefly talk about who's on that committee, who's on that committee. And we actually had over 40 meetings over the last couple of years with key stormwater experts, and made great progress that what you're going to see today. But as you know, Oakland County obviously took the lead on that. You all know me. I'm Jim Winnick. I think I know most of you with the Water Resources Office. I was on that committee, as well as Steve Korth and Glenn Appel and Ryan Walesky. We also had Macomb County Public Works Department, who played a key part in this regional collaborative committee. Jeff Bednar, in particular, brought a lot of great experience to the committee, as well as Daryl Gasplees, who also was on that committee. Wayne County, too, we had Noel Mullet, who, we had some folks come and go a little bit with Wayne County, but Noel was there from the beginning, and he remains on the committee. I'd like to thank Noel and Pat Cullen as well. Brian Johnkier with the Livingston County Drain Commissioner provided support, and his Deputy Drain Commissioner, Ken Recker, was also a key member of this committee. I did want to, although Washtenaw County was not an official member of our committee, I did want to just have a shout out for them, because they kind of paved the way for all this several years ago in terms of infiltration and new standards. And just a shout out to Evan Pratt, Scott Miller, and Katie Wachuk with Washtenaw. They always provided information when we reached out to them, and they were very helpful. And we used a lot of their information as background, so appreciate it. OHM is our key facilitating consultant, and you'll meet them today, obviously. Greg Kizvinsky, key player, Valerie Neves, and Nancy Russell. And like I said, you'll hear more from them today. They were integral in this effort. Lots of other experts on the committee. Don Carpenter we all know Don Carpenter, right? If we're in the stormwater business. Drummond Carpenter and Don, he was on the committee for many meetings, and we appreciate that. Paul Loosely with environmental engineers, Lynn Seymour with HRC, and so thank you. Just wanted to say that up front. And also many of the communities that we reached out to over the last several years, got a lot of input from a lot of communities, had a lot of meetings, and we really, really appreciate your input, and your input is reflected in what we're going to talk about today. And also would like to just thank Eagle, Christy Alwyn, and Ralph Resnick, who were also, we didn't always agree with our regulators, with Eagle, but we certainly managed to, continue the discussions and move forward. So I certainly appreciate their input and their help as well. So that's all I want to do is just thank folks, and I'll turn it over now to Valerie, who can get into the weeds a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so from a broad perspective, the goals of Oakland County's stormwater program are to ensure that whatever standards are implemented are straightforward and consistent and relatively easy to meet. And additionally, the county is looking to improve conditions from what's out there today. So we're looking to improve water quality and protection of our channels and infrastructure. Oakland County has a desire to promote the use of low impact development techniques. And so that's part of the overall stormwater program, and ensuring that things over the long term are maintained. All of our stormwater systems, regardless of who owns them, are owned, operated, and maintained efficiently. And then the desire for consistent stormwater reporting and tracking and mapping. And we'll get into a little bit of that more in detail later. So why do we need to manage stormwater in the first place? Well, most of us are probably do business or live in the state of Michigan. I would think for the most part, Michigan has thousands of miles of freshwater coastline and rivers, as well as millions of acres of wetlands and then inland lakes. And so we have an important requirement to protect those resources to the best of our ability, given the dynamic of humans interacting with those features. And it should be no surprise to anyone on this call that when we take an undeveloped area and we develop it, it generates more stormwater runoff, and therefore we need to manage that in an effective and efficient way to protect those resources. Drilling in a little bit further into Southeast Michigan in particular, this is a map of the 7 counties of Southeast Michigan, and you can see the blue area was development prior to 1970, which was mainly concentrated in the city of Detroit and primarily Wayne County. And you can see a substantial amount of urban sprawl and development across the region since the 1970s. So we have a lot of urbanization going on and a lot of stormwater that needs management. So why is the county updating their stormwater standards? Well, first and probably of most important is that as the MS4 municipal separate storm sewer system permits are reissued every 5 years. There's changing criteria that need to be met. And so the first is to comply with the current MS4 permit requirements. Additionally, Oakland County is looking at addressing the new requirements that have been added to some of the combined sewer system permits. I think the George W. Kuhn facility is one of the first ones to have a permit requirement to implement a post-construction stormwater program to keep stormwater out of the combined system. And then there's ever-changing technology, conditions, updated rainfall statistics and information. So just ensuring that the program remains consistent with the latest and greatest technology and information that's available. And one of the key goals, both of the county and then the regional team, was to make the rules very simple. And with that comes a more streamlined review process on the county or municipal side of things. And then, as Jim mentioned, there's a strong desire to have consistency between the counties. So it doesn't matter what side of Telegraph you're developing or what side of 8 Mile you're on or I-94, that there's a general consistent stormwater management standard across the region. A little bit more on the RSSCC goals, which are pretty consistent with what I just mentioned for the county. Develop a set of clear, consistent, implementable, and yet enforceable rules. And I won't go into this in too much detail because Jim already mentioned it, but you know, the RSAC consisted of what the stormwater experts across Southeast Michigan, as well as you know, the key folks at the county and county levels. And there is, now that some rules have been prepared, there's not there will continue to be ongoing collaboration between the counties and their consultants to review the standards and provide ongoing and updated regional guidance, clarification, tweaks to the programs as they begin to be rolled out at the county levels. Some of the key goals with the standards is to have that balance between economics and encouraging development, but also protecting the natural resources that we have in Michigan. And I think I've already mentioned all of these goals, so I'm not going to keep them. Additionally, we want to make sure that the rules are protective of public health and safety and the welfare of the general public. And there was a big importance and a priority focused on encouraging redevelopment and development projects and finding that balance. And then, as I mentioned, making sure that across the region that all the counties and the municipalities within those counties are all using a similar set of standards. And then encouraging the investment or the efficient investment in water quality and flood control. And you'll see that as a theme come up when Greg talks through the details of the proposed standards and the rules. Okay, so just a reminder on the Oakland County Stormwater Authority. The Oakland County at the county level reviews site plans that are direct taps or connections into a designated county drain, both inside the MS4 regulated area and anywhere else in the county that is a direct connection to a county system. And then also any county owned park or property is the county's jurisdiction. And then in terms of the combined sewer system, at this point, there's a strong encouragement to manage stormwater, not yet required, although will be in the future at some point. What Oakland County WRC does not have jurisdiction over in terms of reviewing site plans and requiring these new standards is anything in the local stormwater systems. So at the CVTs that are not a direct tap to a county owned system, either enclosed or open. And then the Road Commission of Oakland County is also a separate jurisdiction. Where do the rules apply then? This is consistent with how they have been. All development and redevelopment projects with construction activity greater than or equal to 1 acre. And then the county recognizes that some of the local municipalities may choose a lower threshold for the trigger of stormwater management at the local level. But at the county level, where there's a direct tap to the county system, these rules will apply to any development that has construction activity greater than 1 acre in size. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg to talk through the key rule components.
All right, switching computers here. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm getting some feedback, so I think you can. All right. So some of the rules in Oakland County's new standards will be somewhat familiar. Obviously, flood control is going to still be there, but the new rules are reflective of Eagle's MS4 requirements. And there are several different components that were added to the rules, again, consistent with the other counties as well. And the first one is water quality control. So this is controlling total suspended solids on developed sites. So Eagle allows for two measures to satisfy the total suspended solids. One is 80% reduction or max concentration, or limit the concentration to 80 parts per million or milligrams per liter. It is a choice that you have as an applicant to determine which one you go for. In general, meeting the concentration of 80 parts per million is more achievable with the types of mechanical separators that are out in the market today. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail in another couple slides. The channel protection volume control. This is basically the volume control that Eagle established for the 2-year 24-hour storm. The 4 counties did some negotiation with Eagle to figure out what's the appropriate amount of rainfall. So the 2-year 24-hour storm is about 2.4 inches of rain. But what we wanted to do is find an equivalent rainfall that would allow the design process to be a little simpler, to pick a rainfall value that we want to capture and infiltrate. And for Oakland County, we settled on 1.3 inches. You'll see that in Wayne County, it's 1.0 inch. I believe Macomb is 1.2. And Livingston, I believe, is 1.3, although I'm not sure that's completely signed, sealed, and delivered yet. There's a little bit of variation between the counties. From a design standpoint, it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the size of the BMPs for infiltration, but the differences really are down to the mix of redevelopment and greenfield development, soil types, and land use. Every county is a little bit different. One of the main reasons Wayne County is a little lower is because they're almost all redevelopment, and so the impact that Wayne County has for that 1 inch is a little bit greater because most of the areas are already impervious. So the channel protection volume control is basically to infiltrate or somehow keep on site and reuse the runoff resulting from 1.3 inches. And then rate control. This was established to meet the peak flow control requirement for the 2-year storm. 1.9 inches was selected. I'll get into why that number was selected in a little bit. But this provides additional channel protection in that the volume from the 2-year storm is held and slowly released over a 2-day period. So this has the impact of not only protecting channels downstream, but a reasonable amount of flood control for more frequent events. Even 2-year events tend to cause a fair amount of flooding in areas around Metro Detroit. And the last is flood control. And the key difference now, and we'll get into this today, this is probably one of the most important fundamental changes to the rules, is that there is a variable release rate and storage curve that we're using that, number one, simplifies the process of sizing your detention pond, but number two, provides some flexibility for smaller sites in terms of the amount of volume required, which we feel is a pretty good balance between economic and environmental needs. Next slide, please. So you'll see these acronyms get thrown around. For any of you who attended the Wayne County presentation last year, you'll see these look familiar. So the channel protection volume control, which is the infiltration component, that is the 1.3 inches. That will apply to all sites. So the infiltration component, that will be a requirement. To the maximum extent practicable, we're going to define what that maximum extent is. We've defined that in terms of an existing infiltration rate. So we'll get into that. The channel protection rate control, again, this applies to all sites. So all sites will have this volume and 48-hour release within the design. The intent for the channel protection rate control is, again, to provide channel protection, understanding that not every site is going to be able to achieve the infiltration standard just due to soil types. So that channel protection rate control is a good backstop. It provides as much channel protection as can be reasonably expected of site developments, while controlling the flashiness of streams, especially for the more frequent events. And Both of these have relatively simple equations associated with them, and we'll get into that in a few more slides. So these are the exceptions. So for any site, the default going in is that infiltration or volume control will be required. However, we are making it fairly easy to determine whether or not that can be met to the maximum extent practicable. We've chosen to go with as one of the measures, an in situ infiltration rate. So you will need to measure the infiltration on your site. That can be done using test pits, infiltrometer tests, as you can see on the lower right picture, soil borings. You can't just use USDA soils information, although that will give you a soil type, A, B, or C, or D. That's not reliable enough. Those are based on spoon samples from decades ago that don't often go as deep as we need to see for this type of analysis. So if you measure less than 0.24 inches per hour, or if the prevailing groundwater is within 2 vertical feet of the bottom of the BMP, typically an infiltration BMP is going to be around 3 or 4 feet deep. So this means that we're looking at, if you're looking at a design for a site, you're probably going to want to look down at least 6 feet from existing grade to see whether or not groundwater is going to be an issue. If the groundwater is higher, then that is another condition that would allow you to seek an exemption to the infiltration requirement. The last main exemption is contaminated soil. So EGLE does not allow for infiltration, stormwater infiltration on sites that have known contamination. So if you have an environmental site assessment or any other information that specifies the location and type of soil contamination, any of these 3 bullets, if you meet any of those, you can seek out a waiver for the channel protection volume control. Again, this was meant to provide a fairly straightforward measure on whether or not you need to provide infiltration or whether or not your site just is not a candidate for infiltration. So hopefully these 3 things are fairly straightforward. If there are any technical questions, we can get to those a little bit later.
We do have a couple of questions, Craig. I'm going to pause you for a second. The first question is, isn't wellhead protection areas also an exception? You want to answer that?
Yeah, typically they are, and that's something that we can work with the county to address in the standard specifically.
And then the second question is that a seasonal groundwater level?
So this is where some engineering judgment comes in. If you were to look at an infiltration test in August and it's really dry and the groundwater is just barely below that threshold, it's probably a pretty good bet that the seasonal high is going to be above that. If you take it in the spring at the seasonal high groundwater level and it's maybe you've got 1.5 feet of clearance between the bottom of your BMP, that's still potentially doable because then your BMP is still going to operate fairly well, probably through most of the year. So it's going to be a judgment call and engineer's discretion on that. But keep in mind when you're taking the infiltration test. If it's during a dry summer and it's close, the groundwater is probably too high. If you're taking it in the spring when it's really wet and it's close, you're probably okay, even if it's a little less than 2 feet. But in that gray area, that's going to be the design engineer's discretion and submit the site plan based on the geotech's or engineer's discretion on that.
There's one more question, and I think this is related to determination of the groundwater table. The question is, does Oakland County have a preference regarding which method is used?
Yes, I can answer that. We definitely prefer the test pits as opposed to the soil boring tests. The test pits are much more reliable, and I believe that's what Washtenaw and the other counties are adopting as well.
Others,
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
oh no, if you had, I just have a few more questions that are popping in about this exemptions. One is, if a contaminated site is cleaned up, can infiltration be used?
If you've done remediation and it's been demonstrated that that all the contamination has been removed, I would believe that would be okay. That might be there might be regulatory questions to Eagle on that end. It would probably have to be going completely cleared through the environmental remediation process, which is fairly detailed, relatively long-term process. But if you have clearance post remediation of the removal of all contaminants, I would imagine you would probably be okay. But that might be a question we need to look into a little bit more. Any other questions, Nancy?
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading them. I think some of them we might hold off on answering unless they're more about the types of infiltration allowed and outlet structures for detention ponds.
Yeah, and Nancy, this is Jim Winica.
Yes.
I don't know if we mentioned early on, but obviously we're not going to be able to deal with all the questions today, but we are going to tabulate those questions and send out a response to attendees on each of those questions. So we will send something out. We can't get to all of them today, but we'll get to some of the key ones.
Yes, great point.
One last thing on the test pits versus soil borings. In our experience, soil borings tend to overestimate infiltration capacity because the material's been extracted and it's been disturbed. And so once you've extracted a soil boring and moved the material around to test it, it's going to show significantly higher infiltration than you'd probably get if you tested the soil in its natural state in the ground. So keep that in mind as well. You get better results, more realistic results with, a test pit infiltrometer test. They've been doing it in Washtenaw County for quite a few years now. And honestly, it's not rocket science. You dig a hole, you take a loader out there, dig a hole 6 feet deep. You can usually figure out pretty quickly whether your soils are adequate or not for infiltration. All right, next slide. So one of the things that that Oakland County has been doing, and many other organizations throughout the state, across the country, have realized with infiltration that there is a major benefit to it. If you design your infiltration to these standards, you're reducing annual runoff volume by up to 90%. That is a major benefit, not only for downstream open channels and streams and rivers. There's a water quality benefit, but also in combined sewer areas. If these rules are ultimately applied, it is a significant reduction in volume that is otherwise treated either at a facility like GWK or sent downstream to GLWA's treatment facility. There is a significant opportunity to reduce treatment costs to those communities that pay into GWK each year. Oakland County did embark on a project to look at the impacts on combined sewer systems of stormwater infiltration. The other advantages of this standard is of the Oakland County standard for infiltration. It's applied to all developments. It's a simple equation. We'll get to that equation in a second. The other thing that the 4 counties did is allowed an underdrain to be used when the soils are a little tighter, less than a ½ inch per hour of infiltration. The reason that's good is that, number one, engineers kind of like a factor of safety when they're designing bioretention. That having an underdrain guarantees that they dewater in a normal time frame. It also gives the landowner or the developer some flexibility in the future. So you put an under drain in, let's say your soil infiltration capacity is about 1/2 inch per hour. You design your bioretention cell, you plant it, it grows up, it matures over time. Those root structures dive deep down in. You may not even need your under drain anymore. Maybe you can cap it off, or if you put in a valve, you can shut off the valve. So there are opportunities to use the under drain to help the bioretention cell mature and to dewater, but then maybe not rely on it so much in the future. And again, the last bullet is just reiterating that the equations are simple. We're trying to make this as cookbook as possible and trying to take out some of the more detailed modeling or calculations that are probably not necessary here. And if we do that, maybe we'll see more of these. So channel protection rate control, again, this is to address the 2-year 24-hour storm. Not only does Eagle have a standard for volume control for the 2-year, they also have a standard for rate control. The reason 1.9 inches was selected is it was meant to reflect the excess runoff from a pre-settlement site like meadows or woods under ideal or well-drained soil conditions. So kind of like a natural outlier in the 4 counties in Southeast Michigan. So the 1.9 inches is going to be the excess runoff that would come off that site during or after development. Let's say it was completely paved. And so all sites are held to that same standard. It will significantly decrease the 2-year peak flow for almost all conditions. It will decrease it for any condition, no matter what the existing and proposed condition is. For redevelopment, it would be a very substantial reduction in peak flow. Even for greenfield development, it would at least guarantee that the peak flow does not go up. In most cases, comes down. And again, that's to try to reduce the flashiness in downstream channels. And it will actually have a very positive impact in combined sewer areas, because combined sewers are very sensitive to that 2-year storm. There's usually overflows at that stage. And it'll help to reduce the peak flows in the system, reduce overflow peaks and volumes. Next slide. So these are the equations. For those of you who attended the Wayne County presentation, you'll notice that the upper equation's a little bit different. The channel protection volume control, the -R means that's the required volume. That's a simple calculation that 4,719 basically represents 1.3 inches applied on a per acre basis. So you take that number times runoff coefficient times the area, that is your channel protection volume control required volume. And that volume can be implemented in bioretention cells. Now that volume can be provided for on the surface or in the subsurface, much like if anybody's familiar with Washtenaw County standards, they allow storage on the surface and the subsurface. Same with DWSD and Wayne County and the other counties as well. The channel protection rate control volume is a similar equation, but instead we apply the 1.9 inches. So that's why you get that 6,897. So these are just 2 volumes that are calculated. Very simple. You don't have to know much about your site other than your runoff coefficient in your area to calculate these 2 volumes. Next slide. Now we get into flood control. So several things happened between the last version of the flood control rules and today. Number one, we understand that the rainfall depths for the 100-year are significantly different than they used to be. Many of you have used these equations. These are what Oakland County refers to as the Arginian method. These were derived based on rainfall depths probably from TP40. And they're quite useful and they've worked for many years and they're great. However, the rainfall intensity equations have all changed. So especially for the 100-year storm, the total rainfall that we have is significantly higher than before. And so we wanted to develop some new equations. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to update the stormwater equations. The allowable peak flow has changed. It was 0.2, it will be 0.15, but that will be consistent across the 4 counties as well, including DWSD, which is also 0.15 CFS per acre. But this is the key difference, and this is where we think from a site design standpoint, it's going to be a little bit more straightforward for smaller sites. So the 0.15 CFS per acre is going to apply to sites 100 acres and larger. When you get smaller than 100 acres, that release rate is going to start to creep up to 1 CFS per acre when you get down to a 2-acre site, 2 acres or smaller. There are a couple of very valid reasons for this. We didn't just pull this out and just decide on these values without looking at the runoff potential from sites. Smaller sites have a higher runoff potential, regardless of the land use, regardless of whether it's developed or undeveloped, mainly because the time of concentration is shorter. There's really no flood routing on an individual site, no real travel time. So even under pre-settlement conditions and relatively sandy soils, a 1 or 2 acre site has a runoff potential of at least 1 CFS per acre for a 100-year storm. When you get to much larger areas, that goes down because you got the travel time and flood routing and attenuation that results from that. So this is based on actual data, looking at larger and smaller sites. So we're not bending the rules to smaller sites. We're actually kind of following what the hydrologic response already is for those sites. So the nice thing about that is that for smaller sites, there's going to be a little bit of a relaxation on the total volume that's required. This doesn't mean that we're going to have a negative impact on flood control. We're still going to be reducing peak flows and controlling them for the 100-year storm. It's just that it's going to be a little bit easier to meet the volume requirements for those smaller sites. That's really important. That also helps to balance the fact that we are using the NOAA Atlas 14 100-year rainfall depths, which are higher than they were before. I'll get into the equations on the detention in a little bit. The other thing that we can use is we can credit certain types of infiltration against the flood control volume. So if you have a site with a bunch of bioretention cells and you've got a detention pond, the volume within those bioretention cells can be credited against your 100-year detention to save you a little bit of footprint. The intent here was to try to balance, we know that more footprint is going to be required for infiltration. So as a consequence, especially for the smaller sites, the footprint required for flood control is going to be a little smaller. That's the economic and environmental balance we're trying to work with here. Next slide. So this is some of the math behind what I was mentioning on the last slide. We looked at the actual runoff potential for sites large to small, using various methods, HEC-HMS, SCS type hydrology, rational method. And we did find that the smaller the site, the higher runoff potential. And that's why we came up with that. Again, the curve is going to be what you see in that black dashed line. That's what we based our storage curve on. And we'll explain how this all unfolds in the next few slides. I did want to state though, Oakland County does, for certain drains, they have a specific release rate for drains that are hydraulically constrained. Some of those release rates are 0.15 CFS per acre or significantly less than that. The county still has the ability in the rules to require that lower release rate for sites within those drains. So there's 2 potential triggers for peak flow control. If you're in a restricted drain, in terms of a restricted rate, that restricted rate will still apply. For areas where you don't have a specified restricted rate, that variable release rate will apply. All right, next slide. So the equation to size the detention pond is based on a curve. This curve was actually stolen from the TR55 manual. They actually have a curve it's based on a relation between the total 100-year runoff volume that goes into the pond and the total peak flow that I should say it's based on a relationship between the total peak flow that comes into the pond and the total peak flow that can come out of the pond. That's the Q in versus Q out. So the more restrictive your release rate, that ratio changes, and the amount of volume you have to capture goes up relative to your total 100-year runoff volume. This equation allows you to figure out where you're at on the curve. It's fairly simple. Once you go through section 1 that was emailed out, the equations are all there. It takes you in a step-by-step process. But basically, you have to just calculate a few things. They're all rational method based. It's based on area and runoff coefficient. Once you know that, you just have to calculate your Q in and Q out of your detention pond, and you can figure out your volume very quickly that way. So these are the equations that are used. The first is you calculate your allowable discharge rate. So in the past, you used the 0.15 CFS per acre, or in the case of Oakland County, if you're in a drain that has a more restrictive rate, you use that, and then you get your allowable peak flow. In this case, you look at what your allowed release rate is in terms of CFS per acre by using that top equation. Once you calculate that, that's going to give you a rate somewhere between 0.15 CFS per acre and 1 CFS per acre. If you get down to a site that's 2 acres or smaller, you're going to hit that 1 CFS per acre, and that's as high as you can go. Once you've done that, you calculate your storage volume, and the variables you need for that, they're in section 1. The equations are in section 1 that was sent out. You need to get your peak flow into your pond, your allowable peak flow out of your pond, and then your 100-year runoff volume. And again, those are all simple equations based on the rational method, based on your runoff coefficient and your area. So once you've calculated those, all these equations automatically play out. And if you put these into a spreadsheet and use them over and over again, it will make your site plan design fairly simple. There's fewer steps than before with the Arginian equations. So with all of that, I don't know, are there any questions, Nancy, that have popped up?
Whoops. I think these ones we'll answer offline.
Okay.
Greg, this is Jim Winica. I'm just anticipating, you had mentioned that there can always be a restricted outlet. And I think that's key to the folks that are like on the line here that are worried, oh my gosh, we can't allow any more than 0.15 CFS per acre. Well, you know, a community or a restricted drain, you know, will be identified. That limit will be identified. So I think that's very important, and we will clarify that in the follow-up information that we send out.
Jim, thank you. So that's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to Nancy for some of the site plan examples.
Thanks. So the next few slides, I have 2 examples to go over. And the point of these is to apply everything that we just talked about, all those new equations on site plans that have already been approved. So keep in mind, think about in the lens of, you know, parking could have been shifted a little bit differently. Just want to put that precursor out there. So Val, with that, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so our first example is a redevelopment. This 22-acre parcel is adding roughly 1.85 acres of parking lot. So that, oh, that's okay. That red, the red box is just saying that green space is going to be turned to a parking lot. Like Greg mentioned with the equations, what's really key is your area that you're redeveloping. So the 1.5 acres for this site, and then your runoff coefficient, 0.74. And with that, for our proposed rules, those are the key numbers that you need. Val, you can go to the next slide now. For this site, for the existing local standards, they only had to have stormwater for the detention, the 100-year detention. So using the Oakland County design method as is for this site, they calculated the 100-year detention to be just over 17,000 cubic feet. Again, the allowable release rate was 0.2 CFS per acre. So they only had flood control and it was underground storage. Next slide. Okay, so then we're putting on our new lens saying we had the new Oakland County standards. What do we need to do? So we calculate, well, first off, we do soil boring testing and identify that we can infiltrate on this site. So your infiltration BMPs volume is 6,000, roughly 500 cubic feet. And because they can infiltrate, they meet their water quality requirement with the infiltration BMPs. The channel protection rate control volume is 9,500 cubic feet, and the 100-year detention is 11,500 cubic feet. And now that we have our variable release rate, the site is less than 2 acres, so we have the 1 CFS per acre. And again, this is saying that there's no other restrictions that that community might have, so they can use the 1 CFS per acre. With that, they, oh, you can apply a credit towards your 100-year detention because you have infiltration BMPs. So the math at the bottom is basically you subtract your bioretention from your 100-year detention and you get a net volume of roughly 6,500 cubic feet. But as we discussed earlier, we have the ceiling of our rate control, so our 1.9 inch event, which is 9,500 cubic feet. It's basically saying at minimum, you have to store your rate, your channel protection rate control volume. Now you can go to the next slide, Val. Thanks. Just kind of a recap of saying you're increasing your investment in your infiltration BMPs and you're decreasing your investment in underground detention. For this site, the light gray box is indicating the existing size of your underground storage, and the dark blue is showing you how it's reducing in size, and it's almost 50% in reduction. Now you can go to the next slide. Okay. Our other example is a commercial building. This is a completely undeveloped site that was developed to commercial building. The information on the site is it's just over 10 acres. Like I said, it was a new development and the runoff coefficient is 0.59. Next slide. For this local community, their existing local standards required, so they have 4 bay volume for their water quality, which was just under 14,000 cubic feet. They actually have their detention for the 10-year, not the 100-year. So that's almost 57,000 cubic feet, and the allowable release rate is 0.2 CFS per acre. Again, this is all based on current Oakland County design methods for this community. They just do the 10-year instead of the 100-year. Okay, next slide. Thanks. Again, re-looking at this site with the new standards in place, they did soil boring testing and identified that they could infiltrate. So by doing infiltration BMPs, roughly the volume is 28,700 cubic feet. And since they are able to infiltrate, they do meet their water quality standard, which is for the 1 inch. They had the channel protection rate control, 42,000 cubic feet. And then the 100-year detention is 54,000 cubic feet. And again, just want to note that it used to be 0.2 CFS per acre, but it's increased to 0.62 CFS per acre. And that's because of the variable release rate. You can apply your credit towards your 100-year flood control from your bioretention. But again, as mentioned before, with your rate control volume, that is the minimum storage that you're allowed. and that's 42,000 cubic feet. And I want to mention on this site, you may be thinking that, oh, you're eliminating parking, there's more to it. This site, we actually did an additional study and looked at the amount of parking that they had and if it was redundant, and they actually had over 50 extra parking spots for this site. So we were able to, on top of that, reduce the amount of impervious area. Thanks. So this is just a recap to kind of paint the big picture of looking at the volume comparison between the existing rules and the proposed rules. So the navy, the dark blue, is what existing volumes that these sites have, and then the green is looking at the proposed standards. Example 1, for the local community stormwater standards, they just had to do detention. So the detention total was 17,200 cubic feet. With their proposed, it's more distributed. So you have the infiltration BMPs, your rate control volume, and your detention volume. But since you can apply the credit of your infiltration BMPs to your detention, your total is just under 16,000 cubic feet. And so that's just over 1,000 difference between your existing and your proposed rules in volume comparison. Example 2, your existing, you had a 4-bay and detention with a total volume of just over 72,000 cubic feet. Versus again, the proposed, it's distributed between your infiltration BMPs, your rate control volume, and your detention. And again, with the credit that your infiltration BMPs allow, you're really just summing your infiltration BMPs with your channel protection rate control volume for a total of almost 71,000 cubic feet. And as you can see, they're very similar. It's roughly 500 cubic feet of difference between what's existing volume to what's proposed for the volume. And I see a bunch of notifications. I don't know if it's relevant or.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that might apply here, Nancy. The first one was regarding the example 1. What would need to be provided or considered, if anything, if the existing site had no detention or was deficient for water quality control?
So if you couldn't infiltrate, this is what I'm understanding, you would have a mechanical separator and you would have your extended detention as well as your, I guess your extended detention is part of your underground storage, but you'd have a mechanical separator to deal with your water quality if you cannot infiltrate.
Okay, and then another one I think is applicable at this point. If water quality is addressed by infiltration BMPs and you are also using a detention pond on the site, does this mean that a 4-bay is not required for the basin?
I can answer.
Okay, I was just thinking about it, but you can go, Greg.
Yeah, so if you, and this is actually specified in section 1, but if you have infiltration BMPs that cover your entire site drainage area, then that's your TSS control too. So therefore you do not need a sediment 4-bay if you are taking care of your infiltration on your site through some kind of infiltration BMP, and you're meeting the 1.3 inch requirement. That measure automatically meets the TSS requirement, provided that it's collecting the site runoff from your entire site. Some sites you might not be able to get all the runoff, from your entire site into infiltration BMPs, whether that's due to grading or soil types. In that case, maybe a portion of your site may need to go to a small 4-bay, but the intent is for the infiltration BMPs to cover TSS automatically.
Sorry, there was a question or clarification that came in through the chat for example one. Example one, redevelopment. What happens if the site already sized and built their current stormwater system for full build out?
Yeah, obviously, when you're developing the site, you think about the future and if parking is going to be added. So, if it was already built and had to do this redevelopment, then they would still need to meet the new stormwater standards. But if it was, I think, if the site was completely rebuilt, then the rules would apply completely. And then if they added on, same thing.
Okay, and then last question, I think applicable to these examples, and then the rest are general. We'll cover the rest of the presentation and then come back with any time left over and answer the more general questions. Have you performed a sensitivity analysis on differing infiltration rates for these examples?
We have not.
Actually, we have, our regional committee has, Livingston County specifically did some work on that. And obviously, the better infiltration rates you have, the better soils you have, it's going to be a much smaller footprint. So it is quite sensitive. And we do have some information on that.
The reason for allowing the under drain to be used for lower infiltration rates was to take away the necessity to make it takes away the necessity for the BMP to be really, really large when your infiltration rates are really, really low, because then you have such a low drawdown time. You have to make it, you have to make it bigger and shallower. But the under drain provides that kind of minimum but acceptable drawdown time, so you don't have to oversize your infiltration BMPs, because the intent here is not to create such a large footprint for infiltration that it makes the site economically inviable, non-viable.
That's a great question, and we will definitely follow up with some more detail on that.
Okay, we'll go through the last few slides of the presentation, and then we'll spend the rest of the time answering any of the remaining questions until the 3 o'clock time is hit. So O&M, I think we all know the importance to maintain anything that's built and put in practice. Stormwater systems are no exception to that. It's critical that we don't just put these systems in and walk away from them, that in order to make sure that they are functioning as they are designed, both hydraulically and aesthetically, that there's long-term maintenance occurring. And that perpetual maintenance and any record keeping associated with that are ultimately the responsibility of the property owner that has developed the project, or that owns the property after a developer has come in and developed the site. So specifically getting into some of the details of what will be required in terms of documentation and as part of the site plan review and approval process, there will need to be a fully executed O&M agreement in place. And as part of that, the documentation, there'll need to be a legal description along with any required easements for long-term access and maintenance of the stormwater systems, a description of what the stormwater systems are and where they are on the site, where they're proposed, and then where they're built on the site. And then the memorandum that is the actual O&M agreement language. And then something that's being developed and will be implemented in the future is a more detailed stormwater O&M plan. And what we will eventually be working toward is a plan sheet that's part of the design package that shows where the stormwater systems are and what the planned maintenance activities are with those specific features. And then this last bullet is a new item, and the details of this are in section 1, a list of all the submittals and the pieces of information that will need to be submitted in a GIS format. But the ultimate goal of this is for long-term for the county to better understand and track where these systems are, what they are, how much volume they are managing, so that in the future, there's better understanding of overall on a acre per acre basis, how many acres have been developed or redeveloped, and then how much stormwater is being managed and in what way. As part of the site plan submittal package, there will be a requirement to submit GIS data of the point features and the stormwater system. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, after today, the proposed rules and when I term the proposed rules, we're talking about section 1 that was provided to all of you via the meeting invite, and it will be posted on the county's website by the end of this week. Those rules will be presented to the county drain board and then subsequently presented to the county board of commissioners. And then the big question is, when do these become effective? When do we have to start designing sites to these new standards? And I think the answer is the end of May. So if you want to date May 31st, which is what the county is required to for adoption of the new standards in the MS4 permit.
Val, can I clarify something?
Sure.
The new rules, so this is for, once we take it to the drain board, this deadline is for direct taps only to county drains. So if it's a direct tap, which there's not a whole heck of a lot of direct taps, right? But if it is, WRC would be reviewing that development or redevelopment relative to these standards at that time, the end of May. So obviously the rest of the community, they would have to adopt these standards. They have different deadlines in their MS4 permit. They would have to adopt these standards or different standards if they desire. And so that's going to have a different date. I just didn't want folks to get all uptight. This is just for direct taps to a county drain. We would be looking at this.
Yep, good clarification. The other thing I would note is that I'm under the impression that the communities, the local CVTs are starting to get their permit applications, and that, probably in August or late fall, early mid-fall timeline for having to submit the permit applications is what Eagle's looking at. So the desire is to have the standards in place at the county level within the county's jurisdiction, so that communities can then adopt or refer to those standards for their own individual MS4 permit applications.
Correct, Val. And just one other point I'd like to clarify is, when we present to the Oakland County Board of Commissioners, we're expecting that to occur in June, at the end of June. So basically what that means is that once that's adopted by the Board of Commissioners, then we would be using these standards, for development that occurs on county property. you know, our county campus, our parks and recreation, you know, development and redevelopment, or any direct taps to those county systems. So that's what that means. So we have, in reality, WRC has limited jurisdiction, you know, of stormwater. It's obviously our jurisdiction is direct taps, as stated, direct connections to those county drains, as well as our property. And the community is going to have to adopt these or a flavor of these for their compliance per their schedule. So I hope I didn't confuse things, and I hope that clarifies that.
And then in terms of the details of the standards and the sections of the county manual, section 1 has already been provided to those of you through the meeting invite, but it will also be posted on the county's website by the end of this week, along with the most common profiles or details of detention and dry and wet detention basins. Those revised profiles will be also posted on the website by the end of this week. And then the remaining sections of the engineering standards will be revised and updated and posted to the county's website by the end of May. So the timing with the new rules becoming effective. We very much anticipate that as the new rules become effective and engineers and developers start implementing the standards, that there will be questions, clarifications, concerns, changes, tweaks needed. And so as we begin to implement, we anticipate at least one more kind of check-in meeting with communities, maybe an update on any revisions, clarifications, or working through the details of the engineering calculations with the county stakeholders. So facilitating at least one more future meeting with stakeholders, probably in June or maybe early July. Jim, anything else you want to clarify in terms of the next steps?
Yeah, what I think we can do is, you know, we talked about the updated section 1 with those profiles being on our website this Friday. That will occur, but we will also send that out to this distribution list for folks that are in attendance. So I think we can email that out as well, just so you have the latest and greatest summary document, which really is a good overview of what's to come in terms of the detail, further detail, which is going to come in a month.
There was one question regarding the effective date. Just to further clarify, the effective date is May 31st for direct taps and county properties, both. So May 31st is basically when the rules become effective for the WRC's jurisdiction.
Yeah, the effective date, May 31st, is for direct taps to county drains, excluding inter-county drains. So it's really just chapter 20, 18, and 4 drains. And the standards for county properties will not, you know, that's not going to be implemented until after the Board of Commissioners approves these at the end of June. So that's the schedule. So the May, bottom line, the end of May the May 31st date is for direct taps to drains, excluding intercounty drains at this point in time. We will definitely clarify that in the follow-up as well. And I can also say that, everything is subject to change. When we talk about Board of Commissioners approval, drain board approval, et cetera, things are subject to change. And certainly we fully expect to get lots of questions from folks today. We've had 150 people on this webinar, so we're going to take all that into consideration and keep you updated. And we, definitely really look forward to ongoing coordination with you, because I'm sure folks on the line are going to have lots of questions. But we think the end result is that you're going to like the straightforwardness and simplicity of these regionally proposed standards.
One thing that, sorry, there's some feedback there. If any community representatives in on this call, that they review site plans at the community level within Oakland County, one thing you could consider is, and this has already been done for at least a couple of developments I'm aware of in Oakland County. This is outside the county's jurisdiction, but these would have been local city jurisdiction. They've allowed the site, the applicant to develop the site and have the plans reviewed under these new rules. And in the cases where they did allow that, the applicant went forward with these new rules and everything worked out quite well. It was favorable to everybody. So, those were good tests of these new rules on whether they'd be easy to implement, making sure there weren't any major pain points. It worked for the community in terms of a relatively easy review, and it worked for the developer because it didn't cause any major problems or disruptions on their design of their site. So, these work quite well. And if you have opportunities to attempt to use them on site plan reviews even before it's codified, if you have that opportunity just to show that it can be done and it's not a big deal, that might be something you can consider at the local level.
And just to add to that, you should be able to do all of that just with the summary information that we provided. That was the idea behind that. Obviously, there's more details to follow, but you should be able to do that with just the summary, and which includes all the formulas, etc.
I'm gonna try and get through a couple of questions in the last few minutes we have. Greg, I'm gonna give this one to you. How does WRC define redevelopment?
So redevelopment would be the development of a parcel or parcels where the existing parcel or parcels has some sort of non-agricultural development, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial. So that could be, it's really regardless of the percent impervious. It could be changing a Burger King to a McDonald's, or it could be converting a few single family residential units to an apartment complex. So basically anything that's already been improved upon in terms of surfaces. It doesn't have to be all or completely impervious to begin with. It can be only partially impervious, but that's basically the definition of redevelopment.
Okay. Jim, I'm going to toss this question over to you. Do you have a timeline for required changes to combined systems? There's a concern about changing the ordinance now if there are different requirements intended in the future.
So in terms of the combined systems, great question, by the way. In terms of the combined systems, some of our new combined system NPDES permits are now now have language in them that require us to develop post-construction standards, and not just the MS4 areas, but also the combined area. GWK was mentioned earlier. So our hope is that we're going to use these MS4 standards that are approved in the combined areas as well. However, there may be a few differences. We're still working with the communities. So it's not on the same schedule. That's the bottom line, is it's more of a delayed schedule, and that's to be determined. But again, our hope is to be consistent. Obviously, we don't want a bunch of different standards everywhere. So we've got some upcoming meetings with the GWK combined communities to really further vet that out. So more to come on that.
Thanks. And I'm actually going to toss this one to you as well. Would OCWRC be the enforcer of the new standards until the community adopts the county standards? We would have no way to enforce the new rules if there was pushback from the developer.
Would we be so I don't have an answer on that right now, but we will, the whole idea is that we enforce, the county can enforce what we can enforce, right? Basically, it's county properties. We can enforce what's happening on a county property. The communities have local jurisdiction and code enforcement, right? And they're able to enforce through that, their ordinance and their code enforcement program. And that's why this has been designed for the communities essentially to adopt these standards via ordinance, and to enforce, if something's not occurring like O&M that needs to, well, the community needs to step up and make that happen. So I think hopefully that clarifies it, and maybe we can add a little bit on what we distribute after this meeting to clarify that further.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Well, with that, I want to first thank everybody for participating and listening in to the long-awaited proposed stormwater rules for Oakland County. The recording of this presentation, along with the slides and then written responses to the questions that were answered, but also there's been a few that haven't been answered, will be provided to everybody who's participated. And with that, anyone, Jim, Steve, Ann, Ryan, Glenn, anything you want to say in terms of parting remarks?
I'd like to add that our office staff always tried to work with the engineering community, and we recognize each site's different, and you may not always be able to meet every one of the requirements, but our new rules state that you got to make the best effort possible and use engineering judgment. So our office looks forward to working with the engineering community and implementing these standards, and hopefully we'll see you in the future.
I'd like to add to what Glenn said as well, and basically acknowledge that, this is a big change, and this is going to be a work in progress for a while, right? And I think, I really think this committee, this regional committee that we have with the 4 counties and many consultants and experts, I think that's going to be a great forum moving forward to refine things and to provide guidance, consistent guidance moving forward. So I think it's a work in progress, and bear with us, but we've certainly come a long way in the last couple of years.
I'd like to just add one more thing. I want to thank Glenn and Jim specifically. If you don't know, they're both retiring as young men, which is good. Glenn is going to come back part-time to us at some point, but Jim's going to go ahead and sail off in the sunset with his 3 or 4 fishing boats, I think. But they've been instrumental in helping guide this process and working with everyone here. So I think it's really important to recognize them. I think Jim's going to give everybody his home cell phone number, his personal cell. So if you do have any questions about the standards or you can't work the equation, just go ahead and call Jim and he'll help you out.
Absolutely, and that number starts with 555. No, you'll see me around. I'm not going to completely disappear, but I'm sure I'll be in touch with many of you. My last official day is the end of the month, so.
Well, thanks, everyone. That concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, everybody.